listening to KEPW LP 97.3 FM. Also live streaming on www.kepw.org. Welcome to the Age of Vision radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark, where we constantly remind you that love is greater than fear and happiness is resistance. Well, thank you for joining the Age of Vision radio show. This is your host, Lonnie Clark, and this is actually take 3 of this radio podcast tonight. I am determined to do this live in a certain take, although I am making it a draft and I'll make it live. I podcasted once and I didn't have the stereo settings correctly, so it was like double playing. Then I did it again and you couldn't hear me talk. So here I am. I think I'm doing it right, and I'm learning how to podcast on Spreaker, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. Tonight's podcast is actually a little bit different because I am going to talk to you about my radio show and why I am continuing, and it is really specifically because of kepw.org, 97LP here in Eugene, Oregon, 97.3 FMLP. I don't know how I'm supposed to say that, but 97.3 FMLP here in Eugene, Oregon. And for some reason, LP has to be part of the name. But listen to their mission statement, and this is why I have decided to continue to do this radio podcast, because anybody who knew my show before I came to KEPW or was on this podcast, I was on UCY.TV for 2.5 years. I did a podcast every morning live at 8 o'clock in the morning. Not every morning. It depended. For some portion I was on twice a week, some portion 3 times a week, some portion 5 days a week. So, and then I had a co-host and up until the time UCY.TV closed down. But there are many interviews that are awesome. Not because I'm a great interviewer, but because the people that I were interviewing gave us great information. And you can find those on YouTube under UCY TV, or you can go to their, I think she's Jules, who ran the radio station, has kept it up, in my podcast, the Age of Vision radio show, are on UCY.TV. So that abruptly closed over the last summer. She had a medical emergencies and they had to close their radio station. And I was going to just hang it all up. And then because I know Jenna Thrift, the program manager here in town, and I know Rick Gold, who, thank God, part of Eugene Peaceworks, who really, frankly, were the only people who ever showed up with us whenever we did any anti-nuclear activities here in Oregon. I mean, the anti-nuke community in Eugene, Oregon, and across Oregon, I would say, sucks. Nobody shows up to protest. Few people talk about it. It's called, it's the new N-word. It's completely ridiculous. But anyways, when I read the mission statement for KEPW, to be honest, tears welled in my eyes, because I've never heard of this on any kind of 501(c), which KEPW is a 501(c), meaning any money you give to us is a tax donation. And frankly, even for big corporations get big benefits out of giving nonprofits like KEPW a lot of money. So I am specifically asking for anybody listening to this radio show who has access to a corporate fund to lay some money on KEPW, because we deserve it. Listen to this. This is something you do not get anywhere in America. The mission statement. This low-powered station is an ongoing project of Eugene Peaceworks, a 501(c) nonprofit organization. Our mission is to provide a listener-supported on-air forum for artists, activists, and others whose voices have been marginalized or excluded from the airwaves. Seniors, women, children, teenagers, people of color, the homeless, and LGBTQ communities, among others, will host and produce a wide variety of humanity-enhancing programs. The station will feature performing local artists on a regular basis. KEPW's News and Public Affairs Department will emphasize reporting local events from throughout our listening area, which frankly, since we're worldwide, is worldwide. Interviews with people participating in these events will be broadcast live on a consistent basis. Imagine a radio station shaped by diverse community members. Imagine hearing innovative stories from the streets, office buildings, and homes of Lane County, brought to you by the people living here. This is the mission and vision of KEPW 97.3 FM Homegrown Community Radio. Honestly, when I read that, I mean, you can't help but love that. I do. We're not going to get that out of any nonprofit here in town. There is, and I'm not going to say its name. Everybody knows it. There's two, quote, nonprofits, but you don't hear this, and you don't hear the programming that you hear on KEPW, including this radio show. And let me tell you why, because this is what I'm going to talk about. And if you think anybody else is going to be listening to this, think again and allow what I'm about to say, think again. I am going to push back against a big nuke liar tonight. And it is against James Conca of Forbes magazine, who consistently lies and frames and shapes one of the biggest nuclear propagandists ever to be around. Let me just jump to the bottom of his story, how he frames himself. Let's just see what he writes at the very bottom. You know how they always tell you about who the author is? This is in Forbes. It says, I have been a scientist in the field of earth and environmental sciences for 33 years, specializing in geological disposal of nuclear waste. Really? Well, you failed. Energy-related research, planetary surface processes, radiobiology, and shielding for space. Listen, he's added this one. Oh my gosh. I'm a little bit shocked. I gotta say, you guys, like, that blew me away. I was not prepared for that. I have to say, not prepared for him adding on the space thing. Okay. Wow. Radiobiology and shielding for space colonies. Let me repeat that. Radiobiology and shielding for space colonies, which means that's what they're studying for already. Subsurface transport and environmental cleanup of heavy metals. Listen to this. I am a trustee of the Herbert M. Parker Foundation, adjunct at WSU, and affiliate scientist at LANL and consultant on strategic planning for the DOE, EPA, and state environmental agencies, and industry, including companies that own nuclear, hydro, wind farm, large solar arrays, coal and gas plants. I also consult for EPA, state environmental agencies, and industry on cleanup of heavy metals from soil and water. Well, you have failed, Mr. Conca. For over 25 years, I have been a member of the Sierra Club. Yeah, like the fake anti-nuclear environmental. Oh, my God. I'm spitting nails. Okay, I'm just going to read this. For over 25 years, I've been a member of Sierra Club, Greenpeace, the NRDC, I bet you have, and the Environmental Defense Fund, I bet you have, and many others, as well as professional societies, including the American Nuclear Society, the American Chemical Society, the Geological Society of America, the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. You big rat. Okay, let me just stop calling him names. Okay, I apologize for that, folks. Let me go back to the story in Forbes that got me spitting nails and deciding to dedicate the whole show to this. Because the fact that KEPW allows me to do this radio show. I am so grateful. Because if you think any other radio station, at least in Lane County, would let me do this show, think again, because I am going to make some commentaries that's going to knock your socks off. This is how we have found ourselves. The sheer hypocrisy, the sheer narcissistic abuse of the nuclear industry is beyond comprehension. What this man is about to say is a reflection in the mirror. It is so grotesque. It's why we are in the dire straits that we are in. This is dated September 18, 2018, Forbes magazine, written by James Conca, who just touted himself as being an expert for all this whole gigantic thing. And let me just add to this. When you come to this page, you will see a picture of the nuclear storage waste tanks that we have in our country, which are stored in our country. And if you look at these tanks, they are cylinders that stand up straight, probably 20 feet tall. If you understand, in the United States, we store our tanks in what are called whole-tech thin cask canisters, which are 1/2 inch to 5 inch thick canisters that are known to crack at year 20, according to the manufacturer. In order to store the nuclear waste, we pour the waste inside these canisters. They don't get moved. We store them in there, and then we build a concrete box around it, and we put vents at the bottom and at the top. And that's how they check for radioactive contamination, to see if it's leaking. And if it shows a high level of radioactive contamination, they put little cameras in, like little wire cameras, because you can't go inside those concrete tanks. And once it starts cracking, you can't move the tanks. So keep that in mind. He's showing us a perfect, pristine picture of tanks that look super white, super clean, 2 men standing there without any protective gear, perfectly safe, and radioactivity right next to it. Listen, this is the subtitle on the picture. Nuclear waste storage tanks and disposals is an incredibly safe activity with worker safety record better than working at Walmart. Can you imagine this man wrote these words? But nuclear scientists are nowhere in its public discourse and media coverage. You know why? Because they can't lie publicly, you rat. No one has ever died from nuclear waste storage and disposal. That's a lie. And no one is likely to in the future. That is a lie. Although you wouldn't know it from watching the news. Shown here are some spent nuclear fuel storage in dry casks, safe for well over 100 years. NRC. That is such a lie. People have died from nuclear waste storage tanks. In fact, not only have they died, but their children have autism. They have diabetes. People have schizophrenia. They get autoimmune diseases. And then they get cancer. And you know why we don't know if they're related to the nuclear contamination that they're living in? Because nobody tests for it. That is the real answer. Let me check on the time on this, you guys, and I'm hoping that this podcast will work. I'm gonna keep going. Tonight it's actually like November 19th at 12:46 a.m. I started this project on November 18th at 11 p.m. I wanted to podcast live at 11 p.m. because on KEPW on Wednesdays and Thursday nights at 11 p.m. I show podcasts live. So that was the idea, but it's taking me an hour and a half to figure that it wasn't working, and I'm hoping it is working. I hope I figured it out this time, because I'm going to keep going until it's done. So I want to read to you the story that Mr. James Conca has written. Leonard Pitts Jr. posed a thought-provoking question in the Miami Herald last week. When the history of this era is written, who will be to blame? Although blaming the school system for not teaching critical thinking or the Alex Jones or Fox News of America for fake news, or the internet for flooding the public with what looks like legitimate discussions may seem likely, Pitts thinks the real news media in general will take a large part of the blame for failing to be energetic advocates for and defenders of the actual factual truth. How do you like that? Mr. Conca has actually, in one paragraph, blamed the education system, the propaganda system, and the internet for, quote, illegitimate discussions. He's framing this topic to tell us to don't worry about nuclear waste. His main thesis of beware of false balance, don't surrender a boneless both-sidedism that simulates professional impartiality at the cost of clarity and fact. Having geologists on with creationists to discuss evolution is a false balance. That is true. See, this guy throws in truisms. This is what's so ironic. The title of his Nuclear Energy Needs Truth, Not Truthiness. This is what he does. Truthiness, truisms. This appears to be a symptom of modern society in the 21st century, where Google graduates have replaced PhDs as the pillars of knowledge. Or, let's just put it this way, Mr. Conca, where the pillars of knowledge have replaced knowledge with corporate preference. How about that? Because John Goffman, Arthur Tamplin, and Nobel Peace Prize Linus Pauling all did studies in the 50s and 60s, which conclusively have proven and have never been disproven that radioactivity causes irreversible harm on the human system. Okay, moving on back to his lying story. Maybe we did too good a job as scientists. You notice he pats himself on the back of what a great scientist he is? Maybe, I think this is called the scientific priesthood, as quoted by Dr. Alvin Weinstein. Maybe we did too good a job as scientists, solving major problems like polio. Polio, by the way, was not a major problem, you stupid rat. I wish I could cuss, but I'm not going to cuss. In compliance with the FCC. Okay. And engineering amazing technologies like our electrical grid, water and sewer systems, supermarkets, things that allowed Americans to no longer worry about the day-to-day basic survival. Oh my God. Supermarkets actually do not help us. They fill us with stuff that kills us. Almost everything in a supermarket is inedible. It's made out of plastic byproducts, oil byproducts. Oh, God. Okay. Let's move back to his story. This is why I had to read this story, you guys. Maybe we've removed the average person so far from the nature of the world that we've allowed them not to care about reality at all, and instead focus on their personal desires and beliefs, as if beliefs could hold up your car as it could drive across a river, as if your beliefs could keep you alive in the face of diseases so you don't vaccinate your children anymore, as if vaccines actually worked. Like, this is the big lie. Here he's setting people up. These people are such rats. Let's go back to this story. Okay. Stephen Colbert coined the word truthiness to describe this phenomena, that basically one's desires, intuitions, and fantasies are as true as reality and can substitute them with no consequence. Isn't that what Donald Trump does? Isn't that exactly what Donald Trump does? This distrust of science, expertise, and even written history is profoundly illiberal. How do you like that? Illiberal. You know, in the terms of liberal ideas, meaning my freedom allows me to make you a poverty-stricken wretch because I need to be free. to the world system that the United States fostered after World War II. A system that was to aid the world in moving towards democracies and republics, and which also trended towards prosperity and a generally higher quality of life at the same time. How disgusting of this man. What do you call a higher quality of life, where everybody works 50 hours a week, you rat? You shove your kids into school to get indoctrinated? Back to his lying thesis. But democracy seems to be in global retreat lately. Well, your capitalism is not democracy, you rat, and your fascism and destruction of our environment and denial of science is not a democracy. It is not coincidental that the truth is, too. The science that is in retreat in the United States as well should be profoundly disturbing. The founding fathers, capital F's, were children of the Enlightenment, capital E, and viewed science and technology as fundamental to the survival of our emerging nation, capital N. All of these capitals, in my view, are like code for racism, for the elitism that this man completely represents. Back to his fascist pig story. There is nothing which can better deserve your patronage than the promotion of science and literature. George Washington, First State of the Union, 1790. How dare he even use George Washington in his story? Listen to this wild statement this man makes with no reference. In fact, let me qualify this. That a quarter of American people think that the sun revolves around the earth isn't as weird as it sounds. Let me Google that. Let me just see if Google... How many Americans think the sun revolves around the earth today? Now, where did we hear this? NPR. This was done in NPR. 18%. That was 2016. 18% believe the sun revolves around the earth. I wonder how many Americans actually think that the sun is flat. 18%. Well, that's not 1 in 4, you rat. But I guess if you round it up, okay, I'll give you. I'll be generous and say that's okay. Okay. Let me get back to this. But they didn't influence scientific and public policy. Now they do. Oh, okay. This is what he said. That a quarter of America in 2018 think the sun revolves around the earth isn't as weird as it sounds. Half of Americans believed that 100 years ago. Almost 100% thought that in 1776. But they didn't influence scientific and public policy. Now they do. No, they don't. They're still 25% of the population, you dumb... Possibly the most glaring example of this distrust, here he comes with his punch in the face, is the scientific expertise in nuclear energy, one of the earliest targets of truthiness. It is not one of the earliest targets of truth. You know why? Because the nuclear energy reverts to truthiness all the time. For the last few decades, non-scientists and scientists from other fields took over the expert voices on... That is not true. John Goffman was one of the discoverers of the uranium. If he understood nuclear better tn anybody. He and Arthur Tamplin and Linus Pauling understood nuclear energy better than anybody, and they said unequivocally it is harmful, and we have seen that come to pass. The nuclear denial, these people are freaking punching us in the face. This whole entire article just makes me spit nails. I think, you know what, this is ironic because I did this whole show 1 whole hour and messed up the way the sound looks. I had to delete that podcast. And then I did it for another 15 minutes, started reading the story, and I'm still spitting nails every time I read this story. That nuclear denial is beyond comprehension, and it is immoral. It is a complete immorality. It is a reflection of everything that is wrong with humanity. Dang, man. Hang on, I gotta take a break, man. I'm getting all worked up here, man. This really gets me going. Let me get back to this rat story. He's in Forbes magazine. You know, Forbes magazine has a large vested interest in the uranium cells on the planet and nuclear power. And this guy, James Conca, if God did us a favor to make him have a heart attack tonight, he'd do us good. Let me get back to his story. Possibly the most glaring example of this distrust in scientific expertise in nuclear energy, one of the most earliest targets of truthiness. For the last few decades, non-scientists and scientists from other fields took over as expert voices on nuclear, providing a false balance even though they had little technical understanding of the subject. Quite untrue, you liar. This left Americans wide open to ideological diversions and disinformation, even with good intentions, and made them ready to turn on scientific community underlying nuclear science. You liar, it's because we've never had real nuclear science testing. After John Goffman found out that John Goffman, in his book Poison Power, specifically stated he was giving the test by the Department of Energy to say, okay, let's figure out about this nuclear waste. Tell us that it's good. Maybe we can find a reason to help humanity. And at the best, your second mission, if you can't tell us that, then tell us it doesn't harm us. Well, after really extensive study, 2 years of study, when their first study came out, 2 years, they said, no, it is extremely harmful. We want you to wait. We think you need to know how to handle this before we put it out in the public. That was their repeated testing for over 10 years, at least 10 years of scientific study. And then they just ceased it. They do not even test for plutonium anymore, you guys. We are in dire straits with nuclear contamination, and this freaking liar, James Conca, is one of the most irresponsible monsters that we have had on the planet. He is a Mengele of major proportion. Listen to how he frames this. It is outrageous, these lies that he puts out in Forbes magazine. This left Americans wide open to ideological diversions and disinformation. That's from you rats. Scientists at places like MIT and Caltech are now considered shills for the industry because they are. Although few nuclear scientists work directly for the industry because they all subcontract, there are much easier ways to get rich than going into science. Yeah, you liar. Science isn't about getting rich, you stupid rat. Actual nuclear scientists are never consulted by the media. Not true. Only they're not allowed to talk. Actual nuclear scientists are not allowed to talk. Because if they were allowed to talk, they'd tell you, heck yeah, that stuff will kill you. People get sick and die all the time from it. Only people like Bill Nye, whom I love but has no expertise in nuclear, and Dr. Michio Kaku, who, while being an amazing physicist and science communicator, knows little about biological effects of radiation, nuclear waste, or even dose. That is another lie, Mr. Conca. This false balance that they bring to nuclear discussions is worrisome. You know what is worrisome? Is you lying all the time, weekly, regularly. I am fed up. Ask the people of St. Louis who have been dying, 10-year-old, 6-year-old, 5-year-old children, people having autoimmune disease all their lives, not being able to have babies, having brain cancer, having their mothers die of cancer, having their fathers die of cancer. Just stop. Just stop the denial. It is beyond comprehension. Oh my gosh. Hang on, we have to do a little station identification for KEPW again, you guys. Here we go. I'm going to put it on. In fact, I'm going to play 2 of them.
Hey, mate, you've been listening to KEPW LP 97.3 FM. Also live streaming on www.kepw.org.
You're listening to KEPW LP 97.3 FM, serving Eugene and Springfield. Also live streaming at www.kepw.org. Okay, let me get back to this story. And probably a good thing I had to take a station break, right? Because I was starting to really spit nails. Let's get back to what Mr. Conca is writing. That's why it's so frustrating to watch my favorite shows like John Oliver and see him ignore actual nuclear scientists when he spent most of an episode discussing nuclear waste. Handling and disposing of nuclear waste is safer than working at Walmart. The risk to future generations is lower than eating potato chips. This guy actually wrote this sentence. The risk to nuclear generations from nuclear waste is safer than eating potato chips. I mean, honestly, I don't know how you guys can't be spitting nails right now, but I'm spitting nails. It is a known fact 4 to 8 generations later is when we see the worst of nuclear contamination. Ask all those people that are living near 3 Mile Island, near Hanford, who are having microencephaly babies. Asking all the people that live near 3 Mile Island whose children and grandchildren have autism. Ask them. Or people who have autoimmune diseases. Or people whose parents have died of cancer. Actually, I had a teacher at LCC. I went back to college a couple of years ago, and I was at LCC. And my teacher, I could not believe it. She actually ran a science class. Oh, well, my dad worked at Hanford. I'm like, oh, really? How do you like? She said, well, I don't know. He died 2 years after he retired. I'm like, you're kidding. It's from cancer. She's like, oh, no. That's not from that. It's just, he just died of cancer. Bleep. This is a science teacher. Educating our children, living in complete denial. I had another girl who was in the class over at LCC. She was like 27 years old. I was sitting at the table and she had like this big scar down the bottom throat of her chest, Somebody made mention of it. There was 4 of us at the table and somebody mentioned something about her scar. Like, oh my God. And she's like, oh, well, that was when I was a kid. I was born with a hole in my heart. And I'm like, really? I said, where were you born? She's like, oh, I'm from Washington. I was born like 20 miles away from Hanford. You know where that is? I'm like, Hanford? Yes, I do know where Hanford is. You do know that's probably, related to radioactive contamination. That is like a common birth defect that the medical industry has deemed like not that big of a deal because, like her, they were able to operate on her as a baby and fix the hole in her heart that was probably caused, and almost no doubt, from nuclear contamination. But did anybody test her? No. So is the story of what happens. And James Conca gets paid to write, the risk to future generations are lower than eating potato chips. And people wonder why I'm willing to do this show 3 times in a row to make it work. That's why. Let's get back to this liar story. Maybe the problem for nuclear is that very few of us, nuclear is the smallest community in science. And the nuclear field has always been shy of the limelight. That's because, thieves like to work in the dark. A leftover from the Cold War, right? Like Nazis, right? And something that gave the spotlight to anti-nuclear activists. There is no spotlight to anti-nuclear activists, you jerk. How many people are actually going to listen to this radio show? As it is, KEPW programming decided to put it on at 11 o'clock at night instead of 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Because nobody wants to hear about the N word or the R word. So annoying. Let's get back to his story because we only have an hour. I got to stop screaming at him. Oops. Hurricane Florence is a case in point. Listen to this, you guys. Oh my God. There was never any risk to the nuclear power plants in the path of Florence or any other hurricane in history, but that did not stop wild fears and speculations of what could happen if things went horribly wrong. Ridiculous comparisons to Fukushima abounded, but no nuclear engineer or scientist appeared on any news shows. You know why? Because they cannot talk. They are bound by a secret code of secrecy. It's called the nuclear priesthood, as directed by Dr. Alvin Weinstein in 1962 and adhered to by the mainstream media, which is owned by the nuclear industry, by the way. And in fact, Hurricane Florence and every hurricane and every flood has threatened humanity. And in fact, it has spread nuclear contamination everywhere. We have nuclear contamination everywhere, folks. So just get over it. Let me just keep reading. What made the news is that the nuclear plant issued an alert that all roads around it were flooded, but there was no danger to the plant, which had shut down as a precaution anyway. So the plant, hold on just a second. So the plant closed down, but what about these casts, which I talked about in the very first part of the show? These casts that stand about 10 feet high, maybe 6, 12, 15 feet high. If we're having flooding and there are holes at the bottom of the casts that stand 3 to 4 feet above the ground, and the water gets in there with where all the nuclear fuel is and fills up those holes, what happens to that nuclear waste around every single nuclear facility? And I'm not just talking nuclear power plants. I'm talking about fuse wrap sites. I'm talking about the military sites. What happens to that, Mr. Conka? Conk you on the head. And yeah, I do mean to be disrespectful because these kind of people do not deserve our respect. What made the news is that the nuclear plant issued an alert that all roads around it were flooded, but there was no danger to the plant, which had been shut down as a precaution anyway. True dat. It's scary that scientific expertise has become a dirty word in the halls of Capitol Hill. This guy is so nasty. That is such a lie. Political and ideological groups are adroit to pretending to include real science to push their agendas, resorting to pseudoscience when necessary. And he has a link to what pseudoscience is. Okay, let's see what this link says. What is pseudoscience? And he gives us something about what pseudoscience is, so we get to hear what he says. The new crop of Google graduates and Google graduates are their present-day soldiers and are flooding society with so much noise it's difficult to tell who's a scientist and who's not. Like you, Mr. Conka, you are not a scientist. You are a nuclear shill who has denied and harmed millions of Americans in this country for your own riches to sell the uranium industry. Okay, let's go back to this. Vaccines are suddenly seen as more dangerous than diseases like whooping cough because they are. Whooping cough is not a deadly disease if you handle it correctly, sir, you dumb jerk. Fluoride in the water is a conspiracy, and it is. It kills you. It harms you. It gives you cancer. It is a byproduct of the chemical, and I think it's a petroleum byproduct. It's absolutely ridiculous. Instead of asking for Geological Society of America about earthquakes and evolution, it's now okay to just serve creation ministries. What the heck is this guy talking about? We love TV shows featuring CSI scientific gadgets, but that's not how law enforcement works. Watching political activists on TV discuss events like Fukushima, one wonders, where are the actual nuclear engineers? That's a really good question, Mr. Conka. Where are they? Because you're not it. You just said that nuclear waste poses less threat than potato chips, which is an outright straight-up lie. Oh my gosh. This makes me so mad. It makes me spit nails, you guys. I do not know how anybody can, even believe these liars. Listen to the framing. Okay, we're close to the end of this thing. These are dangerous and stupid trends. Stupid trends. Don't you love this? Dangerous and stupid trends. So, if you even think that Fukushima could be harming you, you're stupid. You get that message? Trends that have undermined our funding for science in America. Not true. That have eroded our scientific and technological leadership in the world. Not true. That have discouraged American students from entering the sciences. Not true. You know what's done that? Underfunding of all education, you dumb jerk. And that have made us more dependent on science coming out of other countries, like China. If you don't believe me, just ask an expert. Now listen to this. That's the end of his story, right? So he ends this whole framing of how we need to be afraid of depending on China for their scientific expertise. That it's because we believe that Fukushima is harming the planet and we're being stupid about it. And let's go ask the experts, right? So then at the end of this, if you don't believe me, ask an expert. So then this is what he has in italics right underneath it. These people, what's really sad is that these old geezers and these people who think that they gotta believe Ford magazine if you want to make money. Listen to this. I have been a scientist in the field of the earth and environmental scientist for 33 years, specializing. This is when he puts out this spiel of who he is. So go ask him. Mr. Dr. James Conca is an expert on energy, nuclear, and dirty bombs, a planetary geologist, and a professional speaker. Honestly, it is a disgrace. It is a true disgrace that is who we have in. And let's go, when this guy says that it does not harm us, let's go look and see what Popular Science, this was a really good article I found, March 16, 2011, written by Malika Ashford in Popular Science. And the title of it is called, How does nuclear radiation do its damage? And I won't read the whole article. We have about 15 minutes in the podcast. But this is a really good thumbnail on what it does. And you notice James Conca talked about none of this. Ionizing radiation, the kind that minerals, atoms, bombs, and nuclear reactors emit, does one thing to the human body. It weakens and breaks up DNA, either damaging cells enough to kill them or causing them to mutate in ways that may eventually lead to cancer. After last week's earthquake and tsunami, 4 nuclear reactors at Fukushima Daiichi plant are now damaged and releasing radiation. And I'm going to skip that article. Nuclear radiation, unlike the radiation from a light bulb or a microwave, is energetic enough to ionize atoms by knocking off their electrons. This ionizing radiation can damage DNA molecules directly by breaking the bonds between them, or it can ionize water molecules and form free radicals, which are highly reactive and also disrupt the bonds of surrounding molecules, including DNA. Peter Dedon, a member of Radiation Protection Committee at MIT, explains, what happens is that the nucleus of radioactive elements undergoes decay and emits high-energy particles. If you stand in the way of those particles, they are going to interact with the cells of your body. You literally get a particle and energy packet moving through your cells and tissues. If radiation changes DNA molecules enough, cells can't replicate and begin to die, which causes the immediate effects of radiation sickness. Nausea, swelling, and hair loss. Cells that are damaged and less severely may survive and replicate, but the structural changes of their DNA can disrupt normal cell processes, like the mechanisms that control how and when cells divide. Cells that can't control their division grow out of control, becoming cancerous. With ingested particles, some may pass through the body before they do much damage. Others may linger, Didon says. Radioactive iodine-131 poses a particularly significant risk because it is absorbed rapidly by the thyroid gland and held there. That is why it is recommended that those who may be exposed to radioactivity in the air pre-dose themselves with iodine pills. The non-radioactive iodine is absorbed by the thyroid, which then does not absorb radioactive iodine if it comes along. Radiation exposure risk is measured in units called sieverts, which take into account the type and amount of radiation and which parts of the body are exposed, allowing us to compare different kinds of exposure on one scale. In a typical year, a person might receive a dose of 2 or 3 millisieverts from things like ambient radioactivity, plane flights, and medical procedures. In the U.S., the annual exposure limit for a nuclear plant worker is 0.05 sieverts per year. Or at below these levels, the enzymes that repair DNA keep up with the damage enough to keep the risk of cancer low. Above them, the body systems of repair can't keep pace. 100 millisieverts a year is a threshold above which cancer risk starts to increase, according to the World Nuclear Association. According to reports, radiation levels have fluctuated at Fukushima. Okay, so we know what's going on there. Let me skip that one. Dead-on stresses that because radiation dissipates like light by the square of its distance, even if levels are high in the plant, just a few miles away, they would be minuscule. The greater danger for people living in the area is the release of radioactive particles in the air, which can accumulate in the body, damaging tissue over time and causing cancer. Receiving a 1 sievert dose of radiation in a day is enough to make you feel ill, according to Dead-On. At 1 or to 3, you have damaged bone marrow and organs, and you'll really be sick. At 3 to 6, you'll add hemorrhaging and more infection. From 6 to 10, at that level is death, or something like 90%. And above that, they just call that incapacitation and death. So, when James Conca says that there is no harm from radioactive waste, he's just completely lying. I mean, that is really the bottom line. I mean, how do we say this? The nuclear energy industry goes on the fact that you can't taste it, you can't feel it, you don't feel like you're being radioactively exposed. You never know when you're being exposed. You might feel lethargic, but you can't definitively say it's from radioactivity because guess what? Your doctor does not test you for radioactivity. Go to your doctor and ask him to test your blood and say, I want to know what levels of radioactivity are in my blood. They will laugh at you or tell you that it is exorbitantly high. It's almost impossible. Oh my gosh. So this is what's kept me going. And when I read this mission statement, because you know what's really sad for me? The fact that TEPCO in Fukushima is still doing this. Regularly going to the streets of Tokyo, finding homeless people, promising them jobs, saying, hey, we'll give you free housing, all the booze, all the drugs, everything you want. Just come and help us clean up this radioactivity. We won't give you a hard time. And they let them come in and they expose them to the most contaminated sites. They have them clean it up. And within 2 to 3 months, they start getting nosebleeds and vomiting and getting really sick. Way too sick to continue to work. So they square them out. It's kind of like the work camps that they had in the 30s. They start getting sick. They're like, okay, well, you know what? You're getting sick, but we're going to even us out. We're going to take from your pay what we've owed you for all the money, all the booze, all the drugs you've been doing. And they give them like $100 and put them back on the street, and they die homeless in Tokyo. And it is a really big problem, and no one really talks about it. But homeless people are not only marginalized by TEPCO, but think about this. They are out in the weather all the time, and Fukushima is continuing to spew out radioactivity at grotesquely high levels since 2011. It forms in gaseous clouds up in the sky, and when it rains, it comes down, and the homeless people are the most exposed. So when I read this mission statement, honestly, it made me feel good to be part of this radio station. And I'm talking about KEPW.org, 97.3 FM LP here in Eugene, Oregon. Because I'm going to keep going. And this is the story that Mr. Konka was referring to. Think Progress reported this. Nuclear plant declares emergency. Second breach reported at coal ash site amid Florence's rains. A second breach was reported at the coal ash landfill site near North Carolina Monday, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, and the latest impact from Hurricane Florence's heavy rains. What date is this? September 17. That was yesterday. The update comes amid in a state of emergency declared at a nuclear plant overseen by the landfill's operator, Duke Energy, as the extent of the damage from Florence, now a tropical depression, slowly becomes apparent. So the Duke brothers have control over this contaminated waste site. Oh my God, you guys. And the nuclear power plant. And the nuclear waste. And you know what's going to happen when people start getting the flu and they start getting really sick? They're going to say it's from the trauma of the flood. They're going to say it's from the people's diet. The victim blaming. This is where we're at in this culture. This culture is all about normalizing abuse and victim blaming. That's what we do at every level. That's why the pedophiles go unaccountable. That's why the abusers, the sexual abusers, Kavanaugh, like just the fact that people even question this guy who lied in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee 4 years ago to get appointed to the courts. And it has come out that he is a liar. I mean, what happened to integrity and honor and telling the truth and being truthful? It's so beyond comprehension. So there's a couple other stories. I'm not going to touch on this. I'm hoping that people in my audience already know about this. Nearly 300 Duke workers and NRC personnel, however, have been stranded at the plant for days due to flooding, some as far back as Wednesday. Some workers have been able to leave or check on their homes and families, but Ledford noted the roadway blockage to flooding now makes it impossible to evacuate the plant's 10-mile evacuation zone if the threat level were to increase, which it is, folks. Across the region, related points of concern are being reported. So 300 Duke workers are stuck at the NRC plant. The plant is safe, but nobody can go home. You got to stay there and work around the clock. This is beyond comprehension. And guess what? Do we hear about this on the nuclear news? No. You know what we're hearing about on the news? We're hearing about the sexual predators. It's beyond comprehension. I mean, honestly. I honestly do not know how these people can live with themselves. And we also have Oyster Creek closing down also. Okay, here's another one. Another story. Florence limiting road access to Duke nuclear power plant September 17th. And it looks like the nuclear power plant is sitting on a lake. You would not even believe it. Usually there are more than 900 workers, but now there are 300 workers at the plant. Duke started shutting down the 2 reactors at the... Well, let me see how much time we have, you guys. Hold on just a second. 5 minutes. Let me get back to this plant. Let me see if I'm going to skip around because we only do have 5 minutes. I would strongly suggest that you guys actually do your own homework on this stuff. Okay, here's a story about Exelon up in New Jersey. September 18, 2018, New Jersey eyes wind power after Exelon shuts Oyster Creek power plant. New Jersey will look to wind energy to replace some of the electric power it is losing now that Exelon has permanently shut down the Oyster Creek nuclear power plant. Thank goodness, it was leaking so bad. Built in 1969, Oyster Creek Generating Station is considered the oldest operating commercial nuclear power plant, nuclear facility in the U.S., and it is quite dangerous. Quite dangerous. I had another story open on that one. Let me see if I can actually find it, but I think I accidentally clicked out of it, so bummer, dude. I don't think that I can find it again. Let me see if it's this one. Ding, ding, ding. Nope, I can't find it. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who listens to our radio show on the internet and here in Eugene, Oregon, Springfield area on 97.3 FM or on kepw.org or live streaming here on Spreaker. And my show also podcasts on my YouTube channel, Nuts for Art. I post up on my Facebook page as a YouTube video. My YouTube page is Nuts for Art. Actually, that's not true. My YouTube page is Lonnie Clark, and my Twitter page is Nuts for Art #2. So you can follow me on any of those places. I'm not a very big media person, although I do Instagram quite a bit, but I do kind of odd stuff on Instagram because a lot of it is more spitting back at the machine, so to speak. Like, I like to watch the propaganda machines, and then I clip little tiny vignettes of them on my phone and post them up because they're pretty obvious about, I don't know, just the propaganda. And then sometimes there's some real people talking real truth, and it's like, oh my gosh. But it reminds me of that movie that David Bowie did a long time ago about the alien, where he came down and he was laying in bed and watching like 30 television stations or 50 television stations on the wall all at one time, right? That's where we're at in America. In fact, that's what this podcast is. It's like a little squeaky voice out of millions. Why do I feel compelled about it? Well, I think I explained that pretty thoroughly at the beginning of this show. Part of it is because of the mission statement. We need to help raise each other up. We live in dire straits right now. We are realizing that the people who told us they were taking care of things, in fact, people like James Conca, he's still out there being paid by Forbes magazine to lie to people and frame things. He literally wrote in that article that radioactive waste, that there is more threat from potato chips than from radioactive contamination. The half-life of plutonium is 24,500 years. It is beyond comprehension that this guy had the nerve to say any of that. So anyways, I'm going to end here, you guys. Put your courage feet on. And by that I mean take action, get engaged and love life, and remember that happiness is resistance, and love is greater than fear. And we're many, they are few, and it is up to us to make our future. And it's up to us to change our attitudes. The one thing they can't take from us is our attitude. So thanks for joining me. I hope to talk to you guys again very, very soon. And listen to Helen Caldicott on Thursday night, KEPW, 11 o'clock. I'm reading another one of her chapters of her books. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.
The Age of Fission radio show brings you book readings, pertinent articles, interviews with both activists and victims of nuclear and environmental contamination. We strive to deliver only the facts from reliable sources. We want to remind you that love is greater than fear, and happiness is resistance. Our dedication to love and happiness paves the road for innovation and healing. As we face our harsh reality, let us hold each other up and rejoice in our humanity. If you want to comment, please send your thoughts to ageoffission@gmail.com. That's AGEOFFISSION@gmail.com. You're listening to KEPW LP 97.3 FM, serving Eugene and Springfield. Also live streaming at www.kepw.org.